Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Everything Women's Wrestling, the FloWrestling podcast where we talk about everything women's wrestling. I'm your host, Lori Ayres. This is episode 3. Today, we're joined by Ashley Flavin, who is the head coach of the Life University Women's Wrestling Program. Today, Ashley and I are going to dive into conversation a little bit about the history of women's collegiate wrestling. She's going to tell us about her history in wrestling. She's going to also dive into talking about the growth at the college level and what she thinks are the next calculated steps that we can be taking to secure the health and well-being of collegiate wrestling. We're going to talk about a bunch of opinions about different topics. She's going to talk freestyle, folkstyle. Should there be a 235-pound weight class in the NAIA? Is there a difference between coaching men and women at the collegiate level? And what can we be doing to build a more definitive, stronger fan base at the collegiate level for women's wrestling? So all of those topics and more. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay. Hey, Ashley. Thank you so much for joining the show.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, we are thrilled to have you on. And how are things going in Georgia today?
You know, we are dealing with the remnants of some snow from yesterday, which means all of Atlanta had a nervous breakdown. But outside of that, we're doing good. Just finished practice. I see your face is still on the Atlanta had snow.
Yes.
It wasn't warm enough to stick, but the whole city just kind of shut down yesterday. So it was awesome, but plenty of time to unpack our new house. So that was good for me.
So you've recently moved in.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So we were living about an hour away, which was great. If anyone's following any of my social media platforms, they know that we have a giant dog. And it was great for him to like sort of run amok, but less good for our travel because it was 45 minutes, an hour away. So now we're 10 minutes from the school. And definitely is going to make things a lot easier on us and the team. So yeah, it's exciting.
Oh, that's very good. Yeah. Traffic is not fun when you've, run practice for a couple hours and then you're trying to head home for dinner and things like that.
Yeah.
So good. That's awesome. And I also wanted to say congratulations, before we get started on so many things. We're going to get into all the congratulations, but first and foremost on your recent wedding, I think in November, right?
Close, October.
Okay.
So we scheduled around the Olympics and World Championships and made sure we were back by the season had to have started. So that way our athletes could be there because it was very important to the team that they got to come. I mean, important to us that they were there also, but so mid-October we got married and then everything's basically the same now. Just, legally had to change my name and change all my email addresses.
Well, I love it. And for anyone who doesn't know, your husband is actually the assistant coach
Yes.
at Life University Women's Wrestling. So you guys are a team of the highest caliber.
Yes, and
So
we can never get away from it, which is good and bad. But it's good to have a partner that cares as much as I do about what we're doing. So it's awesome to be paired up together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, Ashley, we are going to plunge right into the conversation. And I think it's really neat that your wrestling career almost mirrors the timeline of collegiate women's wrestling. So I'd love for you to just start us off by giving us sort of a mix of your story and history in wrestling, as well as, if you can, to throw in some of that history of collegiate women's wrestling for us.
Sure. And I will do my best. I'm sure there are people out there that know the dates a little bit better than I do. So if I'm off by a year, please don't be upset. I know my own history at least. So I started wrestling. I say I know my own history and then I have to count backwards and do math. So I started wrestling in 99, which was my junior year of high school, and so in South Florida. And so I wrestled 99, 2000, and then the 2000, 2001 season. My first year, I believe, was the second year of the unofficial girls state tournament in Florida. Mm-hmm. And I was one of the only girls on my team in high school. We'd have a couple girls come out, but they wouldn't last the whole season. So I was never the only one, but I was sort of the only one that would finish. quick fast forward, Florida just sanctioned. This is the first year that Florida will have a sanctioned girls state tournament, which is awesome. 20 years after I graduated, which is crazy to think that it's been that long. So, okay, so back up. So I graduated high school in 2001 and I went to Missouri Valley College, which had started their team, I believe, in the fall of 99 ish, maybe 2000. But so, right kind of around that same time, there were three colleges in the US at that point that had women's wrestling: the University of the Cumberlands, Missouri Valley, and then Minnesota Morris. And so my options were limited. And I chose Missouri Valley, and I had what many would consider a stereotypical terrible freshman year, and had to kind of get my life together after that. And I ended up moving out. So I went to Moval for a year, left there after the spring semester in 2002. And then in January of 2003, I moved out to the Olympic Training Center, which I think was a year after the program at the Olympic Training Center had started. So I'm kind of a year behind on all of the things. I was at the Olympic Training Center from January 03 until August of 07, which is when I moved out to Oklahoma City and was on the inaugural OCU women's team. Wrestled there for a year before I got hurt.
Wait, so hold on a second. So you were at the Olympic Training Center for 5 years?
Oh, just about. Yep.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And then went to OCU for that one season, ended up getting hurt and left the team, graduated from OCU in December of 09, got a master's degree in public health shortly thereafter in epidemiology, so studying infectious diseases and how they travel through populations, which everyone's super familiar with right now for some reason. And I ended up moving to Georgia. So I actually was previously married. My ex-husband was, well, I guess still is technically a neurosurgery resident. And so I moved to Georgia because he got a residency at Emory, ended up being put in touch with the head coach at Life at the time, and was a volunteer assistant for 2 years before I ended up taking over the program in 2017. So yeah, that's sort of the Reader's Digest version.
Wow. So in 2017, you took over at Life. So this is your 5th season?
This is my 5th season, correct.
Okay. Wow. So you spent 1 year at Missouri Valley, and then it was just a tough freshman year, which we can all relate to. I mean, I think we all have that person that we know or ourselves that has struggled that way. And you were moving from Florida to Missouri. So what was that like?
It's a tragedy for me, truthfully. So where I grew up in Florida, you could see the ocean from my high school. We were not right on the beach, but if you were on the 3rd floor, you could see the ocean. You could see the ocean from like kind of where the slope was and the house that I lived. And so and it was a real, like a huge city. And then moving from that to Marshall, where my high school had more people in it than the town, was very difficult for me. And plus the change of weather and just everything in location wise was tough. And then I really struggled because coming out of high school, I didn't know it at the time. I don't know if anybody knows it if they have an ego, but I had a problem. I had a problem with my ego because I was the only girl on the boys team. I had won the state tournament. I had placed at nationals, and I was like, oh, I'm great. Look at me. And then I got to college and everyone had done that in the very least, if not more. And so that culture and shell shock of, oh, I thought I was good, I'm not good. And just having to deal with that was really hard. I was also a 1st-generation college student. And so as supportive as my family was, they didn't really know how to help in some of the practical things. So there was just a lot that was a struggle for me that freshman year.
I think a lot of women can probably relate to that because they're coming out of their states, right? Thinking, winning state titles, going to all these smaller tournaments and getting to the top of the podium. And when you get to the collegiate level, you have all of those rock stars in the room. So, all right, well, tell me a little. So who did you see at the Olympic Training Center? Who did you wrestle there? What was that like at that time?
So my first roommate was Christy Davis, who then was Christy Morano, and is still one of my closest friends to this day. But I also wrestled with Sarah McMahon, Ira Smith, Katie Downing, who's now Katie Kriebel in Indiana. Clarissa Chun was there, Taylor O'Donnell, Takara Montgomery when she would come out for camps, Sally Roberts. So sort of all like that whole beginning crew. Marcy Van Dusen. I feel bad because I don't want to leave anybody out, but I mean, it was sort of everyone, truthfully.
So all of these names that you list really are people that all of the girls right now coming out should know. Like it's the history of our sport. Right?
They absolutely should. We also had the pleasure of Trisha Saunders would come out and would help coach. So I never competed at the same time as Trisha, but she has definitely been a part of my career. And I was actually at the OTC, the OPTC now that they've added the Paralympics into the acronym, but I was there the year like when they announced that women's wrestling was in the Olympics. And so that was really exciting as it happened too. So there was just a lot of new and change and things going on.
And really, so they announced in 2004 that the Olympics were going to be adding women's wrestling. But lots of changes were happening at this time, even at the collegiate scene, right? So you said there was 3 teams that you had to choose from when you were going to college. But then as you went to the Olympic Training Center, were more colleges adding at that point?
They definitely started. So the program in Northern Michigan started during that time that I was in Colorado Springs. And at that point, it wasn't a college program. It wasn't an RTC either because that model didn't exist. I forget what the exact acronym was, but it was, I don't want to say a baby Olympic training center, but it was a separate Olympic training center. Greco was there as well. And even though the athletes were in school, it wasn't a college team. Neosho had a program. I believe Pacific started a program during that time, Pacific University. And so it was slow, but they were building and they were coming in.
And so at that point, there were no separate associations, right? So the WCWA, did that start to come into existence? I forget the exact year that I've heard that championship started.
So I've heard a couple different things. So there were some unofficial things that sort of were happening, but my understanding is that the association, I think, truly became what we think of it as now in that 2007-2008 range. There was still some sort of, hey, we're going to get together and do it, but it became an official organization, I've been told, that season. I'm sure someone somewhere, probably Jason Bryant, knows that detail better than I do.
But at any rate, the first association where we had all of these schools coming together to compete for a championship was that WCWA. And we still hear about that association, obviously, because it wasn't very long ago that all of the colleges were still competing at that championship, right? So I'm actually going to put up this little graphic, Ashley, and maybe we could talk through that a little bit. So now we have obviously separate associations that are competing for their own individual championships. So the NCAA, the NAIA, which Life University, where you're the head coach at, is part of, and then the NJCAA, the junior colleges. So we have had quite a bit of growth in the last, 20 years or whatever. So you have 43 schools at the NAIA. So your association is building, I would say, pretty rapidly, especially within the last 5 to 10 years. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and the schools, Missouri Valley and the University of Cumberland's are both NAIA programs, and they've been around since the beginning. So they definitely have that foundation. I was looking at the graphic, and I don't know enough about what's going on at the NCAA level yet to know. I think they're still having that kind of weird acronym. I can never remember all the letters, like the
NCWWC, the National Collegiate Women's Wrestling Championship, I think. Yeah.
Right. So it's not sponsored by the NCAA yet because there's still a lot to go with. And I think they're still in that weird acronym time right now. The NAIA, we are invitational status still. We will be invitational this year. we're not sure which year when they'll decide to go to full championship status, because it's not quite so easy as the click of a button, which I think people get confused about out in the, just in the general public. So 40 is sort of that key number for the NAIA, but the NAIA doesn't want to become championship status, let's say today, and then have schools maybe decommit or lose a program, and then they fall back. So they'll kind of set at least a year knowing that we can be above 40 before they move us into true championship status. So I would imagine, the earliest would be this fall, but I think it's too soon. We'll know in a couple months if my hunch is right. But I have a hunch that it'll be fall of 23 that will go championship status. And then I think the same thing for the NCAA schools that people don't realize is it's more than just a number of programs. It also is rosters and competing in a certain amount of events. And there's a lot that goes into it before you become a full, invitational or championship status. So there has been a ton of growth in the past 2 decades, but there's also a lot of boxes to check to keep going.
Right. So I think what you said is so important, that once you hit that magic number of, say, 40 schools, for instance, it's not necessarily, just adding the program. There's criteria that the programs need to meet. And then you said, sometimes they have to meet that for a certain length of time, right? Like you have to have that number, and you have to meet the criteria listed for like 2 years in order, and just throwing that number, I'm not exactly sure, but great points that you're bringing up here. So, okay. So, Ashley, I do want to actually just go back to this slide for just 1 second, because I did notice that there is an error here. The NJCAA, I have that they do not yet host a championship, and actually they do. So the junior colleges for the second year now are going to be hosting a championship. So I just noticed that and didn't want to get hate mail.
Right.
Pointing that out.
And I think the other thing to point out, though it is different, is that there are several schools that have club programs through the NCWA, the National Coaches Wrestling Association, which is different than the NWCA. All these letters end up confusing my brain sometimes. And the club teams wrestle Folkstyle, and they've had a national championships for the past couple of years as well. So there are a ton of opportunities out there.
Yeah, so there are those folk style clubs at so many of the schools. And actually, they do wrestle folk style, but I've talked to many of the females, I shouldn't say many, a couple of the females and the coaches at some of those clubs, those NCWA, like you said, clubs. And they also are open to wrestling freestyle and some of the opens and things that are around the country. So yeah, a little bit of both, I think they're doing at this point. Because there really aren't, to be honest, there really aren't that many folk style opportunities to wrestle at the collegiate level for women.
Right. And even though there are a lot of clubs that sponsor the sport, there are not a lot of athletes within each club. And I think that's kind of important. And probably I have a hunch we're going to come into that here shortly. So even if there are 40 clubs, if each club only has 2 athletes, that doesn't make for a very large pool of competition, like you're saying.
Right. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit here. So Ashley, you are one of 7 female head coaches in the NAIA. You're the first female head coach to win a collegiate national title. So on January 7th, your team, Life University Women's Wrestling, won the NAIA National Duels. Very cool. So I'm going to flash this up here. So, clearly women can lead this charge. There's no doubt about it. You've shown that. And, you just explained to us, basically women have been coming out of these collegiate programs for 20 plus years. So I was curious myself, how many female head coaches are there in the associations? And so I did a little research. I asked around. And so again, I did the best I could here. I hope I got it right. And if I haven't, please send me an email and I'll make a correction for the next show. But we do have, 43 NAIA programs, and we have 7 female head coaches. So I was curious just to see what that number was. And you can see where we're at with the NCAA programs with D1, D2, and D3. And so I just would love to hear from you. So we can do some easy math here. Collectively, there's 101 programs. So we'll round it to 100. And we have 17 female head coaches. So that is nice, easy math, 17%. So is that number, do you think, where we want to be? Is it reasonable? Is it higher or lower? Like, what are your thoughts on where we're at with this right now?
My thoughts are kind of mixed. It's sort of a mixed bag because I want to see more women in coaching, but we also want to make sure that we are putting people into positions so that way they can succeed. So we don't want to hire people just because they're female, just like in other cases, you don't want to hire someone just because they're male. We want the women to be in a place to succeed and to carry their program forward. And so while I would love to see more female coaches, I don't know if tomorrow is the day to go through and just swoop in and make sure that all 101 programs have a female head coach. I think we definitely need to have more female assistant coaches, and the head coaches need to be able to train them in what it means to be a head coach and not just have them be a practice partner. And part of that is going to come from right now. And I know it happens a lot in women's wrestling, and that might partially be because women's wrestling is very small school oriented. Right now, there's only one, I would say, large school that has a program, and obviously everyone knows that's Iowa, and they haven't started yet. So we don't know what Clarissa's coaching staff, who's going to be on her coaching staff, right? But if it follows the D1 standard, we know she will have assistant coaches. We know she will have a staff. But at small school athletics, it's so different because of the restrictions due to budget. And so often we don't have assistant coaches, and it's hard to bring people in and say, hey, come work this job for free and put all this time in for free. And so that's something that's really, really difficult. And so I think as coaches right now, as much as I want to say, hey, administrators, just give all your coaches an assistant, give them a full-time assistant and full-time GAs, and we'll solve all this problem. That's not realistic for small school athletics. I think that as head coaches, we have to take the leadership role to teach our athletes as they are becoming juniors and seniors, and teach them leadership skills and teach them what it is to be a coach if they have an interest in coaching. And then so we can get them into positions where they can be successful. And so I would love to see more female head coaches, but I don't know if we're ready. I mean, again, there aren't a lot of candidates out there right now, partially because, again, small school athletics problem. Even some of the head coaching positions aren't full-time. And so how do you convince someone to come do a job for part-time pay? It's just a tough call to do, as, for yourself and your future and your family. So, more training and just trying to get athletes while they're in college excited about becoming college coaches, I think will help as we grow into the future.
Okay, so great point. So you, though, Ashley, you were a volunteer at Life before you became the head coach. Do you think that experience was vital to your success as a head coach?
So in the fact that I was here and I knew what was going on. There's a lot that I didn't know coming out of my volunteer position, because truthfully, my volunteer position, I was more of a training partner than I was anything else. I was really more of a practice partner. I wasn't really involved in recruiting. I didn't understand how the scholarship model worked. I knew when athletes weren't doing what they needed to do, but I wasn't a part of the day-to-day operations. And so as important as it was, I think that helped me get my foot in the door here, because my athletic director, Jamie, knew that I was committed, right? You volunteer somewhere for free for 2 years, and that kind of says that you're invested. But I don't think you have to be a volunteer coach, but I think I'm trying to not get myself into trouble. Not all volunteer coaching or not all assistant coaching positions are created equal. So just because you can say I was an assistant coach somewhere doesn't mean that you really got training on what you need to do to be a head coach. College athletics is so much about business management and about people management. It's really a weird cross between business, HR, and psychology as you go through things. And there's so little that in proportionally that I do that's on the mat compared to the rest of my job that, yes, it was important, but there's a lot of other things that go with it. I don't know if I really answered your question, Lori. I'm sorry.
No, you absolutely did. I love what you said too, though, Ashley, about, considering as a coach, as a head coach, identifying female athletes on your team that are leaders, right? That are stepping up, and you're noticing, wow, this person could potentially be a great head coach at some point, and then taking them under your wing and showing them sort of the ropes of what it's like to be a head coach. I think that's super important, because I think that, do you agree with this? I mean, maybe I'm way off the mark here, but I don't necessarily think that a lot of female athletes, particularly in the sport of wrestling, even think that of coaching as an option for themselves.
I would say maybe more now, and especially I would say my athletes, especially because they have a female head coach, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't really been able to find a solid number. It's 5 or 6 is my thought. Again, somewhere Jason, I'm going to owe Jason a lot because I always bring up his name with checking stats and things. But I think I was the 5th or 6th woman to ever be hired as a collegiate head coach for a wrestling program. And so it's the dream job I never bothered to dream because I never thought it was possible. I think that as more coaches are stepping in, more females are stepping in as coaches, the athletes are seeing it as a possibility. And as our programs are having more success, then they're seeing this as it's not just a passing thing. I can get in here and have a real career here. And so, but it's hard because across all sports and across all divisions, women are so underrepresented on the coaching path and in the coaching standpoint. Someone had told me a number one time, I can't remember what it was, but it was really low, the proportion of female head coaches, even females I'm not saying that women can't coach men's sports. Like, obviously they can, but there are so few women that are coaching women's sports, and it's just really confusing to me on why we're not getting our feet in the door more. And I know a lot of it has to do with family and maybe wanting to have kids and what that looks like on the career path. But at the same time, how do we make coaching more accessible for women in general? I think is a bigger question than I have answers for today.
Right. Absolutely. And I think I'm right there with you. I do think that picking the right partner is important. It sounds like you have, the right choice with Christian in terms of understanding what the wrestling life is like. I would hope that my husband says the same thing about me. But I do think that you're right. Family life is a big piece of that because coaching is super demanding. So, but it's something to continue to unpack and talk about. And I have to say, I do hope, as much as I'm so grateful for the gender allies out there, the males that step up and really support women's wrestling, I do hope that number creeps up because 17% does seem low to me. So anyway.
Yeah, no, it's low. But I think we'll see it grow. I don't know. Again, I don't know that it's tomorrow, but I think if we have this conversation in 20 more years, I think the number is going to be, or at least I hope the number is going to be a lot different. I also hope the numbers in general in sport are a lot different. So I guess we'll kind of have to see how things continue to play out.
Exactly. All right. Well, okay. So Ashley, let's dive into the next question here. So if we're thinking and talking about the growth and health of women's collegiate wrestling, we just talked about how we have emerging sports status or invitational sports status in all the 3 major associations. We obviously have seen a lot of growth since that happened in the last 2 or 3 years, but I would love to hear some information. Here's the bar graphs showing that growth. The trajectory is pretty impressive, but what would you say, Ashley, are the next calculated steps, right, for building that solid future for women's wrestling? What should we be doing next? There's certainly a lot of options, right, that are going on, but curious about your thoughts on this.
So I always laugh when we start talking about this. You and I, we wrestling as a whole, like, well, what can we do? Like, we're in charge of what happens next, right?
Mhm.
All I can do is try to have a good team with good grades and a high graduation rate and stick to my budget. I mean, that's pretty much what I'm doing. And obviously, your role maybe looks a little different because a state, your state director. Is that right? I'm not making that up. Are you the
Women's
state director?
chairperson, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
As well as working with Flow and getting more visibility out there. So there are those things for growth. But at the college level, I think right now, what we hear and sort of the really popular talking point is we need to add more programs, grow the sport, add more programs. But the problem is that we're building all of these homes, but we don't have anyone to live in them. We don't have enough athletes to go to them. One of the things that I've talked about recently is that how few programs have full rosters. And I just made up a number and said 20 athletes makes a full roster, which every department at every school has a different number on what they would consider a full roster, but 20 seemed like two per weight class on average. So 20 seemed like a good number. And I'm probably getting this off by one or two, but believe what Jason said was of the 84 programs that are competing this year, only 28 have rosters of 20 or more athletes. And so we're building all these places, but we don't have anywhere for the athletes to go. And like we talked about, we don't have the coaches yet to put there. I mean, we do have people who are capable, but for whatever reason, they don't want that career path. So I again, it's not up to me to say whether a school, and I think the one that we've been hearing about a lot, or at least we heard about very early on when Iowa announced, was Oklahoma State, that John Smith was talking about starting a program, like that they were interested. And that's all well and good, but adding new programs at every Division I school isn't necessarily going to help. We still don't have people to put on those rosters. And then, so let's say we do, so then we take them, let's say we put everyone there, and then everyone that are in the small schools wants to transfer to the big schools because that's the dream, right? Is to be a big D1 athlete. But then you have these other 100 programs that die. And so I think we need to be focused on continuing to grow at the grassroots level, getting athletes in high school and getting them interested in competing in college, and then giving them a solid home to go to. Being very transparent with administrators on what women's wrestling looks like, because it's not the same as other sports. Like in Georgia, I know that we have a girls sanctioned state tournament, but we don't have the number of athletes in our whole state that maybe volleyball has in the city of Atlanta. And so that's going to be really difficult. You're not going to get a lot of kids from home. If you're a public school, you're not going to have a lot of in-state tuition kids that you can rely on for balancing scholarship numbers. And it's just, again, it's going to be really hard. So we have to be transparent with administration on what realistic looks like when you're starting a new program, and saying that you want a roster of 20 in year 3 maybe isn't realistic when there are some programs that have been around for 15 years that don't have that many athletes. And so that's, I think being transparent and realistic is really what we need to do as we move forward.
And that's honest perspective for sure. I do think, we have had, like we said and showed in the graph, a lot of schools start to sponsor programs in the last 2 to 3 years in a pandemic. So that's a challenging situation for sure. We did have good news this week, to your point of growing at the grassroots level and continuing to see our high school participation numbers grow. I'm sure you saw Ohio has decided to add girls wrestling. Actually, can flash that up super quick. But yeah, we're filling that in now. Ohio, isn't in this graph, but we were at 32. Now we're at 33. And so I do think that, we're getting to where we're at a better spot with regard to those numbers. And so, and just really, if we talk about the numbers really quickly, we had 28,000 girls. Those are the hydration numbers through the NWCA in 2019. And that was with the 28,000 number was with 14 sanctioned states. And so it is interesting to see what will happen, right? So now we're coming into 2022 with 33 sanctioned states. And so, could we potentially double those numbers? We have doubled the amount of states sanctioned. So who knows? We have sort of that gray area, like you had alluded to before, where we're not exactly sure which calculated steps to take next. But I do think these are courageous conversations that we need to keep having. Do you think, Ashley, that that there is continued growth at the high school level because of all the collegiate opportunities that we see now? Do you think girls are coming out to be a part of the sport because they know they can be in it throughout their college years?
Honestly, I think it's more because the states are sanctioning it and they don't have to wrestle boys anymore. One of a kind of anecdotal story I heard out of Missouri from one school was I think they had 5 girls on the team the last year before they had a girls team separated. But then as soon as it was announced that they would not have to wrestle against boys anymore, they had an interest meeting and they had it split into age groups. So freshmen, sophomore, junior, seniors, and they had about 40 athletes in each age group come out. So 80 athletes altogether, 80 girls came out and said, I'm interested in wrestling now. Whereas the year before they had only had 5. And I know that that's anecdotal, but I think we hear about that a lot of just, I don't want to wrestle boys.
Yeah.
I mean, my parents don't want me to wrestle boys, or I don't want to wrestle boys, or the boys don't want to wrestle me, or all the different conversations that we always hear. And so I think that as we grow that opportunity, we're going to get the numbers up. Now, even with the growth, we have to remember not every athlete is going to want to go to college and compete. Not every athlete should go to college and compete. Being a college athlete takes a very special kind of person. And now female wrestlers are their own special breed of person, right? Female wrestlers are definitely a special group, but not everyone is cut out for college athletics. And so we're not, just because the numbers grow we have a higher pool to choose from, but it doesn't necessarily mean that higher, we're going to get more, like we're not going to see necessarily the same rate of growth. At the same time, we're seeing the growth, and we're seeing it a lot. And I would be interested to know what our youth numbers look like, because I have a hunch that we're growing so much in that elementary, middle school level that's what's pushing the high school numbers up, because we have so many athletes that are now freshmen and sophomores. And so as of today, even if as the numbers are bigger, I don't know that we're seeing more athletes that are ready to step into college tomorrow. I think we're seeing athletes that are ready to come in 24 or 25, because the year of 24 or 25, sorry, college coach, I think in years as everyone comes in. And so, because the prospective athlete forms that I get, truthfully, I get significantly more from sophomores than I do from seniors. And maybe that's because they're doing a better job of checking things out now. But I think it's also because just the numbers are bigger at the younger level.
Okay, so just for clarity, I hear you saying that you see more growth or more numbers for girls at the high school level as freshmen and sophomores as compared to juniors and seniors. That's encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool.
And I think it's encouraging, not just from a number standpoint and a sustainable growth standpoint, right? It's not just someone that came out for 1 year and then they graduated. It's someone who's comes in earlier and they're sticking with the sport, right? They're not like me 20 years ago that starts as a junior. They're someone who maybe started in 5th or 6th grade and now they're wrestling through. But we're seeing it from a truly raising the level of the athlete. Because one of the things you always hear or see, if you are brave enough to read the comments on anything about women's wrestling, is someone somewhere is making a really not kind comment about the quality of wrestling. And the number of those comments has gone down so much because now women have been able to practice the craft by the time they get to college, they've been wrestling for 10 years. Whereas the norm 20 years ago was you had only been wrestling for maybe 3 or 4. So it is different. And and which I think is good for the sport as a whole, that growth.
Right. Okay. All right. I agree 100%. I mean, all right. So they're here, Ashley. These women are coming. We have over 100 collegiate programs. So I love, I've heard you talk about this before, and I can't wait to, have you share this here. When it comes to coaching at the collegiate level, there's so many, I've heard this question be asked and I've heard people answer it. I think the way you answer it is really, it made me so curious, and I love hearing about it. Are there differences between how you coach a male and female at the collegiate level, or really at any level, but specifically the collegiate level here? Are there differences? Do you approach it differently? Do you think should coaches all be approaching it differently?
So the short answer is yes. Okay. It is different. I've made the joke that the long answer is no, because whenever I've coached male athletes, I mentally coach them the same way as I do my female athletes. Like I care about them like they're people with feelings. I feel like that goes a long way, just strictly from a social standpoint. But there definitely are differences from a physiological standpoint and from a social and just a conversational relational standpoint. There are differences in the way that our bodies are built. We have a lower center of gravity. Our hips are definitely, everyone's heard that, women have powerful hips. We hear it all the time, but nobody, as much as you hear it, you don't think about it in adjusting things. On the whole, and again, there are always outliers, right? Like there's going to be a very flexible man and there's going to be a very not flexible woman, right? But I'm talking very general terms. Women are generally more flexible than men. And so I've given this tip away before, so I will give it away again. When we're coaching and teaching gut wrenches, I'm not looking to lock low on the waist in those floating ribs where traditionally the men are taught, because the girls and the women, girls at the younger age, women are going to be able to, like, they just kind of laugh and they don't turn because they are so flexible. So higher up bone should not move, right? So locking higher up is going to cut down on some of that flexibility, some of those issues. Generally coming out of high school, girls, as they transition into becoming college athletes, haven't had access to the weight room. And so we are starting at a lower level of knowledge on what it takes to be in a weight room, a lower level, just a lower IQ on weightlifting. I don't mean that they're dumb. So whoever just heard me say that and is upset, that's not what I mean. They just have a lower, they haven't been taught, and they can be taught and they can become stronger. And so that's something that goes into play there. I think we have to remember and know, everybody always talks about it, about society and the pressures that are put on girls and women and the thought processes. And then we bring these girls into a weight class sport and we just say, okay, now we're going to say what your weight is. And now you're going to put on a skin tight singlet. And now I'm going to talk to you about being overweight. And if you tell someone that they're overweight, what does that mean? What does that mean in their head? Do they realize what you mean is that you're talking about them where they need to be for competition, for optimal performance and safety, versus I'm saying that you're fat? And so there are a lot of different ways that we have to have conversations with our athletes in order to help them be successful. Now, do I expect my women to train as hard as they can, to make good choices, to train as if to train like elite athletes, to train like college level athletes? Absolutely. And from a discipline standpoint, there's not a compromise because they're women. That's not what I mean when I say coach. You need to coach them differently. The expectation, if this is the expectation for the men, this is where your expectation should be for the women. Like, the expectation is the same. But as far as effort and commitment and discipline, but that doesn't mean that all things are equal across the board. And I think sometimes that message gets mixed up.
Oh, good stuff. I love that. All right. Well, tell us about your team, Ashley. How are the athletes and the coaches, yourself included, feeling after your dual championship win?
I think that we were all kind of overwhelmed the first day or two. At least I had to put my phone on silent because there were so many notifications. So I run all of our social media. So many notifications for social media or my own just personal message of people congratulating us. The same with the athletes. It was just everyone was so excited, and there was that huge high of coming off this goal. When I first started coaching the team, one of the things that we did is we said, I'm not going to set a goal as a coach. That's not, I have my own goals, but I'm not going to tell you my goal. You need to tell me what your goal is. And because we felt like we could get some more buy-in from the athletes if they were setting their goals, sort of like that, always make them think it's your idea kind of thing. Which,
idea.
Yeah, generally we have the same ideas, right? But if it's coming from them, like fun parenting tip, right? Like make your kid think that they want to eat that, like let them make that decision. And so one of the goals have always been team oriented with athletes that come through this program. And the very first year it was place it higher at national duels than we had the year before. I was like, okay, that's a solid goal. And then that it's always been team oriented. And then this year, their goals, I think they saw something in themselves last year when we took second, and they saw that there was more there. And their goal for this year was win everything. And that was just it. They started listing off, we want to win on senior night. We want to win national duels. We want to win NAIs. And they were like, no, win everything. That's the goal. And so they've been training in a way to win everything. And so we got home, and it didn't take long. We had a quick, well, I guess I'm going to backtrack. Sorry, because I don't think it's so excited to tell people this story of what happened because it was so hard. So on December 21st, our program got, shut down due to COVID because of the number of positive cases that we had, which meant that we weren't going to be able to compete at Midlands. And that was just devastating for the team. It was the first year Midlands was going to have women. They finished their finals, and we had been practicing 2-a-days plus individual workouts. I mean, we were training for Midlands. We were peaking for it like we peak for a national tournament. We were ready. And then to get shut down, and then not only hear that we're not going to Midlands, but you can't go home for Christmas now because you've been exposed or you're positive, on top of being worried because athletes are sick. There was just a lot, and it was really, really hard. And then we get back from quarantine, and a couple more girls, also pause. I'm sorry that I call my athletes girls. They call me mom. I'm going to call them girls until they no longer call me mom. I know they're adults. I'm not trying to make them seem like children, but they do call me mom. Okay, sorry, segue. So we come back, and both of our 101 pounders are out due to COVID protocol for national duels, as well as two of our other starters. And it was just crushing as we sat there and had to say, okay, we're giving up 5 points for a forfeit every time. We know that these starters aren't here. And there was a day where it was just really hard, that practice. And a couple of the ladies that are more in a leadership role, we don't have captains, but everyone's sort of, depending on the situation, different athletes step up for leadership roles, right? But Jordan Nelson, Destiny Rivera, and Peyton Presson, those are the three I know for sure, basically sat and talked with the team for a half an hour and said, like, this, we need to get over it, and we need to figure out what we're going to do. And then I told them, I was like, look, we're an effort-based program, so we want to win, but we're not focused on winning. Like, we're focused on giving our maximum effort, and then the wins will take care of themselves, is the theory. And so we told them, you're either going to keep training in a way like you want to be a national champion, or you're not. And if you're not going to train that way, we're not going to go. So you need to make that choice. And they said, no, we're going to do it. And I was like, all right, well then let's go. And then they did. And so I think having that backstory is so important. But then we win, and we get back, and the first practice back, it was, all right, that's exciting. That's over. Everybody cheered for 45 seconds. We had them like close their eyes and visualize how they felt when we won. We're like, okay, now set it aside because we've got work to do. And so that was kind of it. So it was just right back to it.
Well, wow, that's crazy. And I know it was so disappointing about Midlands. So many teams were upset about that. But
Yeah.
to also have both of your, which it makes sense, your 101 pounders would each give COVID to each other, so they would be out, right? But you had to have a lot of things go right in that final duel against Campbellsville that day. It wasn't like you were walking in. I mean, I think anyone in your position would have been like feeling the stress of the situation, right? And but I do think across the whole tournament, really, like Corey Phillips and Peyton Presson, they were a great start, even though you had that forfeit. Those two women came in and really like they performed super well for you at that tournament. So you got the momentum going, right?
They really did. And I think because we talked about it later and was like, well, we gave up the same amounts of points as a fall. So, what would have happened if we had had somebody and lost? But I think because dual meets are so fun and the momentum that teams can start to build, right? And getting a pin in the first match already gives a team momentum in a good way or a bad way. But our team knew that was going to happen. And so they just, I think, came in kind of mad. And so came in and were like, nope, this is where we're at. We got to get it done. And P and Peyton bumped up the whole tournament, was wrestling 116, even though she weighed in at 109. And then like they did a great job. But I think, and I might be jumping ahead of you, but I haven't heard enough people talk about the tournament that Olivia Motley had.
I was just going to bring her up.
Okay.
Totally.
Olivia is our 136 pounder, was not the starter last year. Didn't really wrestle too much last year. And then this year has just been on a tear and came in and beat the 7th and 8th ranked athlete. She also, the match against Campbellsville, won a 3-3 4-3 by the time there was a challenge, but won a very close decision against the returning national finalist. And as much as Peyton came in and did Peyton things, you kind of expect it, right? It's Peyton, undefeated national champ, returner. There's some things you expect. Jordan Nelson, you expect certain things out of Jordan. Even Gabby, there's a certain expectation for Gabby, but Olivia just came in and said, I'm the underdog and I don't care. She just quietly went to work and just really, if we're going to talk about a swing match, Olivia was the swing match of that duel for sure.
And to win 4-3, I mean, and she had to know the pressure was on her, right? Because these numbers were close.
I mean truthfully, I don't know. It's hard with Liv sometimes because she's so quiet and she just kind of has this little tiny smile where she's just like, and looks at you and then keeps it moving. And we've really tried to focus, again, less on wins and more on just go out there, and you'll hear us yelling for her to dance. If you go back and watch the film, it's dance, Olivia, dance, because she's better when she's open and she's free, which I feel like I'm not giving anything away. If anyone's watched the film, they know Olivia is better when she's open and she's free. But she also has a nasty inside trip that we learned about. So tie her up. That'll be fine too. You can't. But and we've known Olivia since she was a sophomore, and saw her compete, and to see her kind of come into her own has been awesome. But yeah, I'm going to ask her truthfully, Lori, because I don't know if she felt like there was pressure there or kind of. So we had been working on pinning combinations with the team because in general, we're very good at getting texts, but we're not great at pinning. And we knew bonus points were going to matter. But then the other thing that we had to kind of pull the team aside and talk to them about was even if we win every match 4-3, if we win all the matches, we still win. We don't need a pin necessarily. So really just focusing on one position at a time. We tell the girls all the time to go out and do their job, and their job is to score 1 point. That's it. You score 1 point. Don't worry about the next point. Don't worry about making it a 4 or a 5. Go score 1 point, and then we'll focus on the next thing. So I am going to ask her, and I'm just going to tell you for fun because I don't know. If she felt pressure, I didn't see it. I didn't see it on her face at all. She was a stone cold killer that match for sure.
She definitely was a hero there. And I do think, if you haven't watched the match, it came down to the 191 weight class. And that match was grueling to watch. People
Yep.
hear like, oh, there was a pin, and it ended in this like, glorious fashion. But the pin didn't come until I think there's 25 seconds left in the match or something, right?
Right, right. It was the very end of the match, and it was, gosh, like you said, that match was grueling, but I think the whole duel set it like I can't think of any other way that that duel would end after everything that happened. So we have the forfeit at 101, win at 9, have that crazy match at 116 with Peyton and Michaela Campbell. Ended up being 22 minutes long between injury time and challenges and clock stoppages and all this mess. So that's at 116. We win at 23. At 130, Bree hit her head, got a concussion, and I think that was 30 seconds into the match. Our AT looked at her and was just almost immediately, nope, she's out. So we have an injury default at 130. Olivia has this big win at 36. We get pinned at 43. Des goes out and does what Destiny at 55. Joe goes out and does Jordan things at 70. And then we walk into Gabby's match. And Gabby, this is her first tournament back after ACL surgery. Midlands was supposed to be the first one back, but this ends up being her first tournament back. And Gabby's beaten this athlete before. Gabby, she's already won this match in the past, but it's a year later. She knows she has to win, or we don't win. Like she knows that. Before the match, she was very worried because she's like, well, what happens if my knee gets hurt again and I have to forfeit? And I was like, none of that matters. Like, your job is to go out there and go do your best. And really, that's it. And we love you. Either you win or you lose. I'm going to hug you afterwards. It doesn't matter, but you're our best shot. Just go work as hard as you can. You're our best shot. And so she's so nervous. And normally nerves in a team competition aren't an issue for Gabby. This was the first time that I've truly seen Gabby nervous for when the team was at stake. She doesn't love individual competitions, but she loves doing it for the team. But so she gets out there and she's wrestling and we're making it work. And then she goes for a throw and goes down. And it's just complete, I would say pandemonium, except it was just complete silence. I feel like the whole place went silent. And our AT went through the concussion protocol with her and ended up seeing that he said that she passed the concussion protocol. And I was like, well, you pulled Bree after 5 seconds of check. So I mean, you're the medical professional, right? Like, if I have to trust you when you say no, I have to trust you when you say yes. And I must have asked him 5 or 6 times whether he was sure. And when he went back to watch the video, he thinks that maybe she somehow choked herself out doing the throw. Like, maybe it went across her neck just wrong. And maybe she was holding her breath, like all these things, because she passed the concussion protocol and, gets up and ends up scoring a couple takedowns before she gets the pin. And yeah, it was as joyful as it was at the end, as terrifying as it was in the middle. And the team's crying on the side when she's down because they don't know what's wrong and everyone's afraid. And we're trying to be so careful with her neck. And then truthfully, she started cussing at us on the mat and I felt like we were probably going to be fine. And then, our AT asked who she was wrestling and knew the girl's name. And so she's got details. And so, but I think when she started, well, I say she was cussing at the AT. She won't cuss at me, because she just, I'll take that. She'll cuss at Christian. She won't cuss at me. So we knew she was going to be okay. And Q gave her the clean bill of health. And yeah, she ends up pulling it out and getting the pin. And it was huge.
Well, it's been the celebration scene around the wrestling community. So it's so cool to see. And just, I think how much it was celebrated made me so happy. Not only your team doing it, but the first female head coach having that national title. It means a lot to all of us. And it's just another step on this journey of building women's wrestling. So I think we're all grateful to your team and to you and to all the people involved. So good news is we get to see you wrestle Campbellsville again. So you're not done. Tell me a little bit about some upcoming competition opportunities that you guys have.
Right. So we were supposed to, last weekend, we were supposed to duel against King and then wrestle in the Tornado Open. And then because of their own COVID protocol, all of that got canceled. And so coming up, we go out This Friday, we're out at Emmanuel, which is about 2 hours away from us, and we'll wrestle duels on Friday against Emmanuel, Limestone. I think Liberty's bringing a couple athletes, not enough for a full duel, but they'll have a couple, and then McKendree will be there. So that'll be a really fun duel. And then Sunday's the Emmanuel Open. And then I feel like I'm at practice because I just went through this list with the team. And then the 29th at home, so here at Life, we'll host Indiana Tech and Bruton Parker for conference duels. And then Presbyterian's also coming out that Saturday. And that's our senior day as well. So that'll be a lot of fun for them. And then February 3rd, is that what that Thursday is? I'm trying to look I can't see my calendar. I believe it's February 3rd is we'll go up to Cumberland's and we wrestle both Campbellsville and Cumberland's up there. The 6th, we take some of our athletes out to Limestone. They're having sort of a novice tournament, so some of our athletes will get a chance to wrestle there. And then 20th, not that you wanted my whole schedule, the 20th is our Mid-South Conference tournament, the individual tournament, which people who are familiar with D1 wrestling know about, like the Big Ten Championship. So this is the Mid-South Conference Championships. And then we're off for 3 weeks before we head out to Jamestown for nationals. So a lot of wrestling to do this month for sure.
So you get some nice training clips in between there, though. So you're scheduled now to the end of the year. Yeah. Okay. All right.
So we've got some time to like regroup and go from there. But yeah, it'll be really good.
Well, we are excited to watch. So is there any way that we can like tune in and watch some of those events, Ashley?
So for Emmanuel, whenever we can't stream something, whenever a school's not streaming something, we'll post it on our Facebook page. We'll do Facebook Live as long as there's an internet connection. Sometimes that's a little sketchy. But then our home match should be streamed. If you go to I believe it's runningeagles.com. If you just Google Running Eagles, the athletics page will show up and you can go to it from there on the 29th. And then when we wrestle against Cumberland's and Campbellsville, that'll be streamed on the Cumberland's page. And the Cumberland's has an amazing sports information department, and they do a great job of streaming stuff. So there's no doubt in my mind that they'll have that streamed and it'll be great quality. So that'll be how you catch that as well.
Okay, awesome. So any of your home matches, though, that aren't streamed, or if you're out somewhere and they're not streaming it, it's Life U Women's Wrestling at Facebook is where you guys are going to live stream that, just in case. Okay, cool. All right, so let's get into this really quickly. I know we're already at an hour. I could talk to you for another whole hour. But just a couple quick arguments on some hot topics in women's wrestling.
Okay.
Right? So you're like, how can we talk about this in like 2 seconds? But we'll see what we can do here. All right, so Ashley, I think I know the answer to this question already, but freestyle or folk style, what are like one or two key arguments that you're like, what are you thinking? How can we, go either way here?
So freestyle 100%, and not just because I hate headgear, but also because I hate headgear. Like I've mentioned it before, and you and I have talked about, we've got that 20 years of coaching experience within women in college wrestling that is freestyle, and that helps with the coaching pool. As well as if the athletes, this kind of gives them that stepping stone. If they want to go to the world or Olympic level, they already have this experience. No, they don't have to, and you don't have to. That's not a big deal, but to me, it's no different than baseball and softball, how they're basically the same, but a little bit different. And so I don't see any reason why we have to be the same as the men. I think freestyle is good, and that's what we should stick with.
Okay. How about
I'm trying to make it fast for you.
That was great. I love that point about the coaching, right? We've had 20 years plus of collegiate women wrestling freestyle. And so if we, expect more female coaches to come out, we're going to lose all of that pool that we've created if we would flip over to folk style. Or we would say the majority of that pool. All right. So adding a 235 pound weight class to the NAIA, are you pro or not so much?
I am con, and it is not because I want to take away opportunities, because I don't. Junior colleges have a 235 pound weight class, and so opportunities exist. We don't see the weight class being filled very much. There were not a lot of athletes at their national tournament at that weight class. We're already seeing rosters not be filled in general, and at the 191 pound weight class, there are a lot of forfeits and vacancies there. I think financially, it's very hard for me to explain to my athletic director why I need a scholarship for someone to go get a forfeit and to only have 2 matches a year. And I think there's room to adjust the weight classes, but right now, if we added a 235, we would have to take away or completely readjust, potentially taking away some of those smaller weight classes, which isn't fair either. I don't think we should add an 88-pound weight class. So I think that's too small, even though unfortunately we may lose a couple athletes who feel like they're too small for 101. I know that there are more that are at that 235 level, but I do feel like if we readjust, I could get behind a 205. I could even maybe get behind a 210. I would have to look at the numbers from the NWCA, but I just don't feel like we have enough athletes that are ready for college athletics to make it make sense across the college division. My similar point would be, I'm sure we're missing out on men who weigh 350 who can't wrestle in college because they weigh 350, but we're not adding a 350-pound weight class. And so that's sort of where my thought process is there.
Right. It used to be limitless, but it's not now. It's 285.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Oh, all right. Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. I appreciate it. So this is the flip the script portion of the show that Jackie Davis came up with, which I love.
Okay.
So question for you. So we want to see the fan base grow for collegiate women's wrestling, of course, right? Are there things that you think coaches at the high school or rec or youth level could be doing to help support to grow some of the fan base? How can we get some of these young women or men or anyone, really? We want everyone tuning into men's wrestling and boys wrestling and girls wrestling and women's wrestling. How do we grow the fan base, and how could we encourage coaches to be actionable about that with their athletes?
So I think you can't be fans of something if you don't know it exists. And so visibility is key. And I even things like this interview, right? Like it's going to get out there. Someone's going to see it and maybe they're going to tell a friend, or the clips that have been coming out from national duels of the team, like that's gotten so much airplay. It gives visibility. And so making things visible. And if you're a coach, maybe that means publicizing your own events more, but also show your athletes what's out there. So there's no reason. And again, we won national duels, but so did King, right? King got their 5th national duels title in the NCAA division. There's no reason why a coach of a high school program can't show those matches to their team. So that way it gets that visibility out there. And I think if you have a local college, whether it's a women's team, a men's team, JUCO, NCAA, like pick a level, go out and support your teams, and try and get some of that interaction from a college standpoint. I know one of the things we do is try to work with our local teams a lot to try and get some, not even a partnership. It's just, hey, some of it's community service. We want to help out the youth, but part of it is just visibility and getting out there. So my very quick answer is increase our visibility, even if so again, you're in charge of this podcast, right? Podcast, interview, whatever we're calling it. You're in charge of this. So you're going to get women on to be interviewed. But if someone's watching this, share it. And just keep boosting visibility, I think is the fastest, easiest, and cheapest way to do it.
I love that answer. That is so spot on. And I think I would love to, in the next, not even, a couple years, even a couple months, be able to go up to high school females and youth girls who are wrestling and ask them, who is your favorite, women's collegiate team? And have them answer and be knowledgeable about that. And so if we can encourage coaches to, like you said, increase the visibility of the matches, like watch as a team, do a watch party of a women's collegiate duel, or tune in and look at the women's weeklies that Kyle Klingman has been putting out and read them as a group, read them maybe at the end of practice, but be knowledgeable. And the women that you pointed out, Ashley, at the beginning of the show, including yourself, understand the history of women's wrestling and who are these great pioneering women who came, before all of the women that are competing now at the college level. So all really, really great stuff. I'm going to go ahead and pop this up here and sort of like push it over to the side so everyone can see some of your social media tags so they can follow you guys. You're putting out some great content. And before I let you go, Ashley, is there anything that I missed that you want to chat about or any shout outs that you want to give?
I mean, I think we covered, I don't know, there's much we didn't cover. We sort of hit a wide breadth of things. This is, again, my fifth season, and I think that I've had some people ask me, like, how did you guys do it? Because 5 years ago we weren't in a conversation at all. And I think that the visibility has helped with recruiting, but also the support from the school. So if I was gonna give a shout out, it's gonna have to be to Life, specifically my AD, Jamie Pendergast, is amazing. She's a huge fan of the sport. She's a huge fan of the team and the programs. She's gonna kill me because I'm going to put her on the spot. But if you watch the clip of when the team wins at national duels and you kind of look up in the corner, you see this gray zip up jumping up and down, and it's Jamie just losing it for the team. She always fights for us. We have a good relationship with our men's program. Coach Omi is awesome. The men's team is amazing. They won NAIA Nationals, dethroning Grandview last year, so that was pretty exciting. And just working together. And then the president of our school, Dr. Scott, and our vice president, Mark Schneider, and our dean, Dr. Bredesen, they're working on things to help celebrate the girls. So the support that we have at Life is amazing. And I think if you want to grow your program, you have to support the program. But coaches, you have to go make your administration fancy your program more than anything else, and then go from there. So that is a shout out to our entire administrative staff, but also a pro tip: go make the people in charge a fan of your program.
Well, Ashley, you are inspiring. Thank you for all you're doing. What a great role model you are for women's wrestling. And thank you so much for taking the time to just hang out and chat today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Lori. Thank you so much for having me. And hopefully we can talk about maybe some really big things happening mid-March.
Yes, I would love to have you back on and talk about that. All right. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.